a famous stage magician recruited by the British military to use his mastery of illusion to help defeat the Nazis. From illusory harbours to vanishing canals, dummy tanks to an entire fake force, the story of Jasper Maskelyne's wartime adventures seems to have it all. But was he really a mastermind of military deception, or was it all just smoke and mirrors?
Well, the name Maskelyne is synonymous with Victorian magic. John Neville Maskelyne was Jasper's grandfather and was a remarkable magician, and he was known as the governor or the chief around his time in the sort of 1870s onwards. And he was a great inventor. He invented great tricks, something like, for example, Psycho, which was this machine that could read minds and it could play cards with the audience. And then Jasper's father was Neville Maskelyne, and he was a great magician too, but he was also involved in science and engineering. And then Jasper was the third in line of the dynasty of great magicians.
Unfortunately for Jasper Maskelyne, by the outbreak of the Second World War, he had failed to live up to the success of his family name, having overseen the liquidation of the family company and the sale of its St George's Hall Theatre in the 1930s. In joining the war effort, he saw an opportunity for his skills to finally be recognised. In October 1940, Maskelyne became part of a small team being trained in the art of camouflage at Farnham Castle.
There were disparate people, mostly artists, one zoologist and the magician Maskelyne. That was about 6 weeks to 2 months. He was then posted to Egypt for the North African campaign. The whole unit were posted there. Maskelyne was assigned the job of running an experimental station.
It was in this role within the camouflage unit in Egypt that Maskelyne worked on some of his most ingenious illusions to outwit Hitler's forces. Or at least, that's what one particular book would have us believe.
So Magic Top Secret was a book that supposedly Jasper Maskelyne wrote, but in actual fact it was ghostwritten. It was ghostwritten in 1949, and it was all about these adventures that supposedly took place during the Second World War. Well, one of the most standout claims that Jasper makes in Top Secret is this Maskelyne's whirling spray of magic mirrors. Now, this was a searchlight that had a number of mirrors attached to it, and it would rotate, and then supposedly 20 of them were going to be built over a course of 100 miles, would render the Suez Canal invisible. But the reality is, from what we gather, is that just one of these experimental devices was made and it was never used.
Another such story from the book involves Maskelyne masterminding a grand sleight of hand trick, where the entire harbour of Alexandria was hidden and replaced with a dummy replica a few miles away, using decoy ships, ground lights and explosive charges to draw the attention of the Luftwaffe away from the real target. A classic magician's trick of misdirection. The only problem being that, once again, there is no actual evidence this ever took place. So, what exactly was Jasper Maskelyne's role during the war?
He was associated with Dudley Clark, who was the real supremo. He was the master of deception and had the highest role in deception in the British forces. He ran a unit called MI9, and they needed magicians because they were involved in spiriting prisoners of war out. They had to smuggle maps and knives and things, and it seems that Maskelyne was definitely used in that capacity. See, Maskelyne was very good with gadgets, but in war, the big game, then, you know, you've got to work with tanks and things like that. There's one very interesting piece of work that was important in the Battle of El Alamein called a sun shield. This was a way of disguising tanks to look like trucks. It was very important, but we know that the idea came from General Wavell. Now, it's quite likely that that idea was passed to Maskelyne's unit, and he may have worked on that. That's the only possible evidence I can find for what he actually did.
Well, I think it'd be fair to say that Maskelyne's involvement in the Second World War, certainly in Egypt, was a publicity stunt. The name Maskelyne was synonymous with magic, and it was in people's minds, this great dynasty of magicians. And the evidence is that the Daily Mail ran a story in April 1941 that he'd been deployed to Egypt and that he was going to use his magic to mysteriously make British troops disappear. So if you wanted to keep it a secret, you don't certainly publish it in the Daily Mail.
In reality, Maskelyne only lasted a year in the camouflage unit before the official records show he transferred to welfare, essentially spending the final 3 years of the war entertaining the troops. After the war, his book fell quickly into obscurity, and as his magic career faltered, he moved to South Africa, where he eventually became a driving instructor. It wasn't until 10 years after his death in 1973 that the legend of Jasper Maskelyne was reignited in modern popular culture.
So I think the myth of Jasper Maskelyne being this war magician was proliferated by this book called The War Magician, written by David Fisher. Now this was written in the 1980s, and it says that everything inside this book is true. Now it's based upon Top Secret, the book that Jasper Maskelyne wrote, which is already exaggerated, and it was exaggerated even further in this book, and it wasn't particularly well researched in some people's eyes.
The text from that, a lot of it is cribbed from Geoffrey Barker's account. So he was the head of camouflage. And what he does is, where Barker says something, Fisher's account puts Maskelyne into a meeting that he never was in. The large-scale effects that he claimed, even though maybe they were deceptive operations at the time, as the record comes out, you would have thought, you know, beyond the Official Secrets Act, they would all have some validation, but that's never happened. But I'm aware that it's very hard to change this story. In the era of fake news, I mean, the Maskelyne story looks set to run forever, because it's a meme.
There's even been talk in recent times of a big-budget Hollywood movie about Maskelyne, first starring Tom Cruise, and then more recently Benedict Cumberbatch. Like all good magic tricks, Maskelyne's story seems capable of making us suspend our disbelief and, for a moment, believe in the impossible.